So here we have the assembly of the Reaper's Bones core set, as well as the Fan Favorites and Dungeon Dwellers expansions. Now, this was a pretty long task. It took me about 4 hours and 40 minutes to complete, which wasn't too bad overall. I ended up using four different things of crazy glue, which is all I used to glue it together. And honestly, it went together pretty easily. I didn't have too many problems. I had a few miniatures that were difficult, which I'll talk about a little bit later when I do the showcase at the end of this video. Um, just different issues with a couple of the different issues with the gluing. One of them was that sometimes the glue didn't want to set with some of the smaller pieces. So sometimes you'd be putting the arm in. Honestly, it was a lot of the NPCs that are female because they have just smaller arms on the models. And a lot of those were just harder to put on because you would put it in and it wouldn't really want to stay in the tiny little hole that they had drilled in order for you to be able to put it in there, basically. And so you just have to hold it there for a little bit. Sometimes they'd go crooked and you'd have to kind of adjust for that and get it to stay where it should, and holding it there was sometimes a little bit difficult. But for the most part, I found that the larger the miniature, the easier together it is to glue, which is great because the bigger pieces or the bigger miniatures come in more pieces. And so having those being nice and easy to glue together, most of those didn't take long at all, have not given me any issues, and were pretty good. Now, as far as other issues that I had with cutting things off the sprues, sometimes it can be a little bit difficult to get it just right. But it's pretty easy to figure out. You just have to be careful. And honestly, if you cut off a little bit too much, or I should say, you should try to cut off less of the miniature and more of the sprue if you're concerned about it, because you can always go in with an X-Acto knife and trim that off nice and slow to get it nice and smooth just how you want it. So most of the time it doesn't end up being a big problem. Um, I think I had one miniature that I ended up leaving a little bit of a dent in because I cut off too much um, where it was connected to the sprue. But for the most part, pretty easy. And honestly, this is my first time ever doing gluing on miniatures on a large scale where you're gluing on arms and legs and things like that. For the most part, I haven't had to deal with that. And honestly, again, it was pretty easy and well worth the time. One of the only other issues that I had was with some of the see-through miniatures. In specifically, they call it the Loot Golem, I think. It just had these three little spears popping out of the back you had to glue in, and finding the holes for those was a pain. I did have to end up looking at a picture of the miniature online to see which way the spear should be oriented and where exactly the holes should be at, and it took me a while to find them, but not a big deal. As far as other things that were good about the process of gluing these miniatures, again, the way Reaper does it is great. They'll have a hole basically shaped like a T that like one arm would go into, then they would have another hole shaped more like an L so that you can't mix up which arm goes where. Basically, the miniature only goes together one way, which makes assembly again really intuitive. You don't need instructions to do it. You just need a little bit of common sense. So if you're concerned about gluing miniatures together, honestly, I wouldn't be. It was very easy to do, and the only bad thing that I think is really bad about it is very time consuming for this core set. The Dungeon Dwellers expansion and the Fan Favorites expansion had a lot of miniatures that came as one piece. So putting the Dungeon Dwellers expansion all together took about a minute because it was one miniature. The Fan Favorite took about 10 because it was about 8 miniatures. Some of them were pretty big. But the core set by far took the longest time because there were so many small ones that needed glued. Um, but overall, it was a fairly painless process. Took a lot of time, but again, was very easy, very intuitive, the way that they designed it, and not bad at all. I'll go over some of the other problems I had with gluing at the end of this video. When I'm showing off some of the miniatures, I'll show you some of the gaps that happened and talk about ways I'd plan on fixing that. But other than that, it was a great process. I would definitely do it again. All right, and here they are. All of the miniatures from the Reaper Bones 5 core set, the fan favorite expansion, and the Dungeon Dwellers expansion. As you can see, it is quite a few. We'll get in a little bit, I'll show you some close-up images of a lot of these miniatures and get it nice and zoomed in on them. But I also wanted to talk a little bit more about the gluing and kind of some of the miniatures that gave me problems and why, and what I might do in the future to fix it, and to just if I would have done something different. So as you can see, there's a lot of the larger miniatures in the back. For the most part, I believe these are all 25mm scale miniatures. As you can see, there are tons of adventurers up in the front here. There's a lot of these little kobolds and little like rats and things like that. There's also a group in the middle over there ish. That's all goblins that I'll show you a little bit later. But for the most part, these are all fairly big miniatures. Um, we'll go ahead and show you around a little bit. Now, my camera work is not the best, so you're going to have to bear with me a little bit. But as you can see here, this group here is a bunch of kobolds, just tons of them, some with spears. There's a couple of doubles in there, but for the most part, they're all pretty unique. Here we've got the owlbear I showed earlier, the giant thing, the ogre, and there are just all kinds of little adventurers here that you can see. These two here in the front are two little like cultist guys that are actually really cool. I'm excited to paint up. One of whom I'll be doing soon. I'm gonna just kind of go ahead and do just like small pans over all these different miniatures because there are so many of them. I mean, they're just every kind of adventurer you could ever want, every kind of player class, almost every kind of race. There's only a couple of dwarf miniatures, which was kind of a bummer, but that's just how it is sometimes. And there's only a handful of halflings as well that could probably double as dwarves if you wanted to. Um, these ones over here, those three, are all like Nazgul, which is really cool, up on their horses, which I thought was awesome. But yeah, this is just kind of all the miniatures, and there are just a ton of them. I'll bring a couple of them close up to the camera here in a minute after I'm kind of done panning over. There were 4 different trolls in there. 4, which I'm excited because you can make like a little group of trolls. I mean, look at all those miniatures. So, I believe they were well worth my money and my time because it has been a blast so far, and they are all really cool. So let me get that resituated. I'll go ahead and grab a couple of them. There was someone in one of the comments who wanted to know kind of the size. So basically anything that's kind of like human size, like this guy here, you're looking at about an inch tall or so. There's a lot of these kind of bigger ones that are more about probably about 2.5 inches tall. And then we'll get to some of these back ones. So, for example, here, this dragon ends up being at about 4.5 inches tall. it's on just a kind of like a medium-sized base, or I guess it'd be a large-sized base for D&D, but it's pretty big. And the nice thing is these are all real detailed. You can see on a couple of these where I had to glue them and kind of the lines there that are missing. Another really cool one was this big old gem dragon back here. So this is all translucent bones, which I am excited. It's hard to see the detail on it because it's see-through, but this thing's going to look real cool when it's all painted up. I'm going to show off this big old guy again because I think he's just so cool. If you look at that guy there, he is just ginormous. Now this guy here comes in at about 6, or what was it? Yeah, 6 inches tall. So this guy is huge, and his base is easily 4 by 4 inches. I mean, it's ginormous. Put him back. Let's grab this guy. So this guy's about as tall, 6 inches tall, and he is a massive, like, mammoth guy, which I'm excited to paint up as well. And his base is like 5 by 3 inches or so. Put him back. Now, a couple of the gluing things I wanted to go over. One of them was this guy and this one here. So, this guy is probably my miniature with the biggest gap after I glued him. You can see it right here. It's just where his head goes in. So the peg that fit into the hole in the body, I don't know if I didn't trim off enough of the spoon when I put it in or what happened, but it left a fairly large gap there, you can see. Now luckily it shouldn't be too hard to fix up. I'm thinking I'm just going to put a little bit of modeling clay right in there. Let's see if I can get this to focus for a second. Come on. Yeah, that's okay. But you can see that big old gap there. So here's one of the harder ones to glue together, or one of the ones that didn't end up coming out the way I wanted, just because of that gap there. This one, however, this one you can't really see up in there, but the inside here is actually hollow. You can kind of see it there. It's just hollow. So it's basically gluing this half and this half together, and then the head, and then gluing it to the base. But getting these two halves glued together, because it was hollow and it didn't have like a hole with a peg that went into it, it was like trying to glue it this way. So you had to hold that thing, and it's, I mean, you can see it still is a little separated here, up here by the head, because it didn't quite fit together well enough. And it was definitely one of the, I think this one was probably the hardest one to glue because it was hollow. But because it is hollow, you can kind of see it there a little bit. Because it is hollow, I think I'm going to make something that I can shove up in there and pull out, like some entrails, some guts or something, because it's like a zombie wolf. So just something I can do to elevate it, because otherwise it's not my favorite one. But for the most part, though, gluing these miniatures together went pretty easy, and I am really happy with the way they all turned out. So the next video after this one is going to be me painting the NPCs, that, or not the NPCs, but the player characters that my players want to have, which is going to include, let me see if I can pick them out really quick. I believe it is this guy here, one of these, this cultist here. Let me just grab them really quick. One of these dwarves. This. Oh, where'd it go? This guy here. That was the other one. And where is that guy? This guy. I should have put them all together, but I'm just a little bit of a slacker because it's late at night and I'm tired, and that's just how the cookie crumbles sometimes when you've got kids. And this one. So it's going to be a wizard lady Ooh, let me see if I can get this camera to focus real quick. So it's going to be this wizard lady, this dude with a shield, which is going to be fun, and this one. I have one guy who's a lizard folk. Whoops. And so I'm going to be painting up this pizza dragon because he likes it. So that's what he's going to use. And I'm excited to paint that one for sure. This dwarf here. This elf ranger guy. And this cultist guy, which is going to be really cool. So tune in. That'll probably be next week. I'll put up the video of painting all of those guys. And I'm just excited to get into it. Again, my goal for the channel is to have all of these miniatures painted by the time the next Reaper Bones is released. Not before it's done getting the Kickstarter, but before it actually comes in the boxes to my house. So until then, we have a lot of work to do. So stay tuned. Again, I'm a novice painter. I'm not professional by any means. So you can kind of see my techniques that I use. You can see what your miniatures might come out looking like. And I really just want to show that getting into miniatures is not that hard, even if you're going to glue and paint and do all that stuff yourself. So I just want to give you guys some confidence to do that. And who knows, maybe a few of you will get into the hobby just like me. So thank you for watching the video. Subscribe so you can see our other ones, and have a wonderful day.